Welcome back to Man vs. Weed, the Stupid Plastic Jar Review Podcast. I'm your terp ghost enthusiast, Tango Hotel Charlie. If you've never listened to the podcast before, maybe go listen to some, and you'll know how this shit works. But long story short, my non-cannabis using wife picks the strains, and I smoke it. Before we get started today, let's do a quick Northern Lights autoflower update. We are now 3 weeks since germination, and things move fast in the world of autoflowers. They have jumped up to about a foot tall and are branching out everywhere. I'm now giving them half-strength vegging nutrients, and they're absolutely loving it. That is, except for one of them. That one had balls. I say had because I had to exterminate them. R.I.P. Kylie over at Parkland has assured me, though, that they will send me a new seed to replace them. I'm just going to make sure the rest are all females first. I expect bud sites to start showing in the next week or so. So, as you know from the title, today's sample is The Batch by Tilray. When it comes to legal cannabis, Robin likes to keep it cheap. And The Batch ticked all one of those boxes. The guy that sold it to her was real excited that she got such a bargain. You see, The Batch was on sale for $16.95 an eighth. It's an eighth. I refuse to say half quarter because that's not only stupid, but confusing. Anyway, that works out to about $5 a gram plus tax. Now, we had no idea it was even Tilray. Normally in the small print on the side of the jar it says the LP name, but in this case you have to do some investigating. The label directs you to a company called High Park Holdings. A quick internet search shows you that they are owned by Tilray. Whee! Multi-level marketing shell game time! Tilray was started back in 2014 by a guy named Brendan Kennedy. Then they were one of the first companies with the golden ticket to cannabis legalization back in 2018. Brendan Kennedy, in true culture vulture fashion, brags about never using cannabis in his life. He's not even Canadian. Nope, just another American with a dream of cashing in on legal cannabis. Well, you still get locked up for it. Speaking of which, they hired former RCMP intelligence officer Jake Ryan to be the director of security for Tilray. Imagine that, going from arresting cannabis users to cashing in on cannabis. But ex-cops and politicians are all throughout the legal cannabis industry, and it's by design. At Phil the MMA Dude on Twitter asked me, what can we do about this corporate fake legalization? Because they're starting to see it down in the States as well. So what can we do about this fake legalization scheme? The answer is to speak up. Don't just be happy it's legal and shut up like they want you to. Find out what your government party member's position is on fixing the Cannabis Act. Find out who is willing to support reform and vote for them. If they support bad policy, vote them out. Finally, speak with your dollars. Don't support pro-criminalization culture vultures that lobby for increased raids on black market dispensaries. Tilray CEO Brendan Kennedy pressured police to increase raids to prevent black market sales from eating into their profits, and put fear-mongering messages about the dangerous illicit cannabis supply. Since these guys buy access to politicians, the politicians listen. Jane Philpott, who was the health minister at the time, heard his message and prompted a warning to Canadians about the dangerous dispensaries and compassion clubs. Compassion clubs! Can you imagine trying to paint the compassion clubs as the bad guy? Well, of course they did. Sure, go after the folks that provide a safe, clean supply of cannabis to sick, often terminally ill Canadians. But it's kind of tricky to just rely on politicians doing the right thing. For example, Tilray puts politicians on the board. Their inaugural board members included Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy, along with Foreign Affairs Ministers from Germany and Australia, and U.S. Republicans Howard Dean and former GOP leader Michael Steele. But it don't stop there. Tilray is owned in part by Big Alcohol, Anheuser-Busch, and Big Pharma, Novartis. Novartis is a Swiss multinational pharmaceutical company that has been involved in everything from sexual discrimination to bribery. They were even involved with Trump and his former scumbag lawyer Michael Cohen. Novartis was paying for access to politicians down there, and that access directly informed Trump's decision-making. This was reflected in Trump's drug pricing plan, which just happened to protect those pharmaceutical companies from reduced revenue via cheaper drugs. Sound familiar? These corporate culture vultures aren't even trying to be subtle either. The company that owns 76% of Tilray call themselves the Privateer Holdings Group. They even have a ship on the ocean as their logo. Privateers were basically pirates that had special permission to rob people for their livelihoods and use them for their own personal gain. That special permission was granted by the government at the time. Sound familiar? Oh yeah, speaking of taking for their own personal gain, they also bought everyone's favorite weed website, Leafly. That's right, Leafly is an LP tool. At the time, they used it to generate ad revenue from the same people they lobby to raid. The traffic it drew pointing people to black market weed spots filled their war chest. But that was just a side effect. The real reason they wanted Leafly was to mine it for data. They used that data to find out which the most popular strains were on the black market. Then they met with the same people they lobby to criminalize to get their expertly grown cultivars, which they took back to the lab and bastardized for their own profit. One Tilray even was musing about how funny it was to be an ex-DEA agent in a dimly lit room with drugs and guns around. Also, a quick Google search will tell you what working conditions are like in those greenhouses they love to brag about so much. I encourage you to Google it yourself. You will see one of the lowest rated employers out there, with stories from ex-employees being consistent across tens of experiences on multiple sites. Poor management is reported over and over again, but also massive layoffs, long hours, and overheated conditions. Racism and misogyny. One account even spoke of powdery mildew in all of the grow spaces. Another employee was quoted saying, "Everything they do is detrimental to the plant's health, resulting in pests and diseases." Another complains of pushing out bad product. This is not one or two. This is the majority of folks that work there. Go ahead, go take a look for yourself. So rather than embracing the black market growers and users, these corporations label them the enemy. Anything that takes away from them having a bigger number next year than they did last year is the enemy. One of the ways they think they can compete with the black market are what they call value brands. These are supposed to be cheap, high-quality legal options to steer the consumer away from the enemy, the black market. Tilray's value brand is called The Batch. Hilariously on the website, they say, and I quote, "Forget cultivars, genetic lineage, unique terpene combinations, and fancy strain names. We serve customers certified quality cannabis that's always in stock and at prices that beat the black market." So this is a product specifically marketed to take you away from the cheaper, more consistently, higher quality growers you have been buying from your whole life. The same ones that put their freedom on the line to provide clean, high-quality cannabis to Canadians. The same growers that LPs like Tilray took all their genetics from in the first place. So let's see if it can compete. And since this is marketed as going head-to-head with the black market, I don't want to hear no complaining about it. Now, first off, it comes in a white plastic jar. And if there's anything we love on this podcast, it's stupid plastic jars. It claims to be 18.6% THC and was packaged on January 30th of this year. When I open the terp crypt, it is deader than a mausoleum. I mean, not a hint of cannabis. I put a piece right up to my nose and couldn't smell a thing. I started to worry I had COVID, so I brought it to a fully vaxxed Robin, and she couldn't smell anything either. And she loves complaining about the weed smells, so she would have said something. The buds were dark green and mostly crumbles. The better buds in larger quantities hypothesis fails again. Once again, 9 out of 10 weed smokers agree that this cannabis is exactly dry as fuck. And I don't even know what that 10th guy is smoking. Stop lying to yourself, 10th guy. However, I put it on the digital scale and it weighs exactly 3.5 grams, so good job to the cannabis weigh-o-matic. It can't do grams, but it can do eighths, no problem. One of my biggest surprises came under the microscope. Amazingly, the trichomes weren't a melty, corroded mess. They were fully intact in an assortment of clear, amber, and cloudy heads. This indicates somebody accidentally, or on purpose, harvested it at the perfect time. One last thing I want to mention before I smoke it is the complete ambiguity of this brand. Once again, we have no idea what we are buying. We don't know anything about its lineage or terps or anything, and they seem pretty proud of that. And I guess, because you can just take whatever crap didn't sell and just jam it in a jar and call it the batch. So to begin with, I pulled a gram out and broke it up. It crumbled into dust, and I twisted the whole gram into a joint. Immediately when I lit it, it made me cough. The smoke was very harsh, and I feel like I coughed after almost every hit. And no, it's not supposed to be that way. I don't know who needs to hear this, but you don't, in fact, need to cough to get off. The smoke was bitter on the lips, tongue, and throat. It was very harsh and unenjoyable. It left my lungs sore and achy. It was so disappointing after those trichomes. I thought we might have had something. The buzz was very mild and nothing to even talk about. With one caveat. At $16 an eighth, you could roll a cannon or two and increase your effects for cheaper than your average pre-roll. So, if you were real desperate, I guess that's an option. But would I leave the black market to switch to Tilray? Sorry, the batch. You belong in the trash. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Man vs. Weed podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with me for anything, email me at manversusweedthc@gmail.com. And if you're on Twitter, you can find me at StreetVillain. Make sure you like, subscribe, and maybe even recommend my podcast to a weed-smoking friend. And until next time, make sure you smoke until you get psychosis. And free the weed.